Up next on Inside the SCCA, VIR Super Tour Preview. Welcome to this episode of Inside the SCCA. I'm Brian Bielanski. Joining us tonight, none other than SCCA VP of Road Racing, Eric Prill. Longtime guest, longtime friend. Welcome to the show, Eric.
Thanks, Brian. Glad to be on again.
Are you, though? So sometimes it's like I'm going to ask you hard questions, but you always come on, and I appreciate it. So, but good stuff though this time. We have a problem that is a great problem to have, right? We have a bunch of new cars, new drivers, all wanting to race with the SCCA. That's a great problem, right?
It is a great problem to have,
yeah.
But it's a question to answer, isn't it?
It is.
Let's not call it a problem.
Right, exactly. It's a great thing to have. How's that? A great thing to have. We've got a couple topics we're going to talk about tonight. Starting off with the first reason we wanted to get together was we have a new program that you're instituting this year with the Super Tour, and it is trying to help. I think that the idea of the program is to help smooth over some of the bumps that comes with a new class, and it has been slightly bumpy. And that is, of course, the introduction of Spec MX-5, which is cool in a lot of ways. It's bringing new cars, new drivers, which is fantastic. But it is taking up some of the schedule and having to find places for Spec MX-5 to fit in what we do. And to help with that, you decided we needed an ambassador for the class, right?
Yeah. So the class ambassador, as we've called it, this is really an extension of the Green to Checker initiative, and we started talking about what we could do as a series to maybe help on the officiating side or help with bridging some gaps.
Right.
I liked your characteristic of maybe smoothing some of the bumps or connecting some of the dots between drivers and the officials of the event, and we wanted to make sure that when we come out of these weekends, we don't find out that things have fallen through the cracks.
Right.
Larger Hoosier Super Tour weekends provide a lot of work for the race director, and that often needs to be dealt with within about 20 minutes
right.
before the next line of drivers appears after the next session. So we took some of the learnings that we had last year when we tried having a Hoosier Super Tour coach and gave that program a little bit narrower focus and a narrower audience. And our initial thought was actually to try having assistant race directors for specific classes. But we also didn't think that person had to be a licensed steward. So we needed to come up with a role and a title that didn't require a steward's license as a race director does.
Sure.
So as you mentioned, our friends at Mazda, we've been working with them to develop this class, this new Spec MX-5 class, or SMX as everybody refers to it. And one of the things that they said was, look, we know that there are challenges on track. It's not just with that class. With each run group has its unique challenges that sometimes we need to deal with. And they said, hey, how can we help? How can we help SCCA manage those on-track activities
right.
in the close classes like Spec Miata and SMX that can take time. And they kind of got behind our effort to pilot this program. The ultimate goal is to provide consistency and work within the community. And that ambassador title seemed to fit well. It was suggested. And this person isn't an official per se, but they are tied directly to the officials. They are there to work together with the drivers and the community to kind of build some trust and bridge the gap to the officials in the judicial process, which we recognize and understand can be a little daunting at times.
So is the person who's filling the role going to be the same person for the full season?
This year we'll have two people.
Okay.
I actually served in the role at the first two events, which was Sebring and then at NOLA. Um, we're not going to have an ambassador on the two West Coast races. These two classes probably don't quite have the size challenges that some of the other events generally have.
Sure.
So Greg Ami has come in to be the class ambassador. He started at Atlanta. He'll be at VIR this coming weekend, and then he'll be at Hallett. I know that I will. He had a conflict; he couldn't do Mid Ohio, so I'll be there, and then our expectation is that Greg will be able to finish up the season with us. So,
Right.
yeah, the idea is to establish a relationship with the community with a consistent person.
Right.
So if you need to talk to somebody about something, if the group needs to be addressed, this is an individual one that ultimately is a racer. Greg is a licensed steward.
Right.
I am now as well. That's not why we're there necessarily. It helps to both have some stewarding background, but more than anything, being a driver and kind of understanding the rules, but also really understanding what it's like to have a helmet strapped on and be in the midst of competition.
Right. Right. When I talk with Josh Smith before the season, I talked with you before the season when it was announced that the Spec MX-5 SMX was going to be a national class at the Super Tour this year, runoffs eligible. I think there was still a lot of unknowns, about how the class was going to be subscribed, how many cars we were going to get in all the races. Is it safe to say that they have exceeded pretty much everyone's expectations with the car counts?
Well, certainly at a couple of the events where we've either pushed or exceeded 30 cars.
Right.
That was probably a little bit higher than the initial expectation. We knew that the cars were out there. We just weren't sure who was going to show up to which races. The drivers that are really serious and that are using this platform and this opportunity to potentially advance their career into professional racing, they've really decided to focus on hitting the super tours.
Right.
Focus on those. And so, yeah, I mean, at Atlanta, we had 33 cars, which, for a class right out of the gate is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
It's the third largest class this year by the numbers. And so that's, as you said at the top, I wouldn't even call it a problem. It's not a problem, but
Right.
it is a good challenge for SCCA to have, because it's also not just simply people moving over from a different class.
Right.
There are a lot of new drivers that we're welcoming into the club. A lot of drivers that are new to racing cars, drivers coming out of karts. And as we know, there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of experience actually racing wheel to wheel that come out of go-karts. But it's also a lot of hungry young drivers. Yeah. And that, requires a little bit different approach sometimes to how you manage that and work with them to make sure that they have good races and that the process works well.
So I'm a little older than you are. So that's no surprise to anybody.
I don't think you're much older than me, but
so I remember back when I was 18 coming up, and the SCCA was the place where future pro drivers went to get their first experience. Al Jr. was in Super V. Michael Andretti raced Super V. Bobby Rahal came up through the SCCA. And the list goes on and on and on and on. And that's at some point in time, I'm going to guess mid-90s or so, when Formula Atlantic became the Toyota Atlantic and it was taken over by then CART and all of that, some of that started to kind of go away. And it was really kind of cool going to races and being on the same track at the same time with these guys who had aspirations. It was a thing. And it feels like, I'm excited because it feels like there is a bit of that feeling back now with this class. You've got Connor Zilic, who's now won 2 IMSA races this year. He didn't come through Spec MX-5, but he came up through Spec Miata. And he's given these kids in Spec Miata the idea that or in Spec MX-5 the idea a little bit that this is a place where I can learn what I need to learn, and that makes for some challenges for you and your team with a lot of young drivers, but it's definitely a challenge worth taking on, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, as you mentioned, the opportunities and the options, not necessarily opportunities, but the options that people have now, who have aspirations of being a professional driver, are so broad. And it's trying to figure out and pick the right one, and most of the open wheel path basically comes right out of karts, and goes into professional series.
Right.
And there's many options there. We have some with SCCA Pro Racing. There are other options, on the IndyCar side, and they all have the same goal, right? They all want to go and be an IndyCar driver, or
right.
They want to, maybe go to Formula One. So on the sports car racing side, Mazda's had this ladder for a number of years, probably going on close to 20 years now. They've had this ladder that started with club racing, and opportunities for club racers that win a championship, or that are standouts in club racing, have an opportunity to go to a shootout and kind of advance your career to the next level. So Mazda's current evolution of its ladder program comes right through SMX,
right.
And right through club racing. And that's not to say that there aren't still opportunities in Spec Miata. You mentioned Connor. There's a number of drivers that are in Spec Miata that have worked their way into the MX-5 Cup Series and are racing at a very high level, and have gone on to race other things as well. But it's fantastic, I think, to have young drivers excited about racing at our weekends, hoping that maybe they could be the next Connor Zilic,
right?
And next year potentially be in a televised series, racing next to the WeatherTech series, or at the Rolex 24. I mean, it's and we want to help them do that. But ultimately, and this isn't all about young drivers, and I just want to make that clear, that the class ambassador is about working with everybody, and helping people navigate through things, when things go wrong on the track. One, how can we avoid things going wrong on the track? And then two, how do we address them when they do? And so we don't get the inevitable phone call on Monday after an event that says, well, why didn't you do anything about this? And the reality is, perhaps we didn't know anything about it. And there will always be somebody that comes away from a decision that an official makes that they're unhappy with it. And that's, unfortunately part of competitive sports, right?
Right.
Officials have to make calls, and they use all of the things that they have available to them to make those decisions. And, we've heard over and over again in the last couple of years, particularly since the green to checker discussion started, we need to do more to, there need to be harsher penalties. We need to have swift action, and we need some transparency on this. And I think those are some of the things that we have made some progress in. Every time there is a driver that there's an action against them in an event, that now appears at the bottom of the results. It used to be there was only a notation if somebody's position changed. Now you'll see if people are put on probation, or if they receive a reprimand. So there's some transparency there. This program is really designed to help address some of the, I don't want to call them simple cut and dry things, but things that close racing, couple cars get together, there's, probably a much more likelihood that this was driver A's responsibility, or that they
Right.
could have potentially been the last one to avoid the contact or the unfortunate situation. And the race director has some tools in their toolbox that they can address things right away, and that they can issue some penalties. There's a limit to that. And that's what the ambassador does. The ambassador is basically having conversations with people after sessions. Hey, somebody comes in, I had some contact. They're not speaking as calmly as I am right now. Usually their hair's on fire. But that's part of it. I understand that. Brian, you understand that. You come in if something's happened on track. You can be a little upset. You need somebody to talk to. Let's talk through it. Let's take a look at your video. Let's find the other driver, and maybe, is it okay to have a conversation between the two of you? If you don't want to talk to each other, then, we can help, um, you know, talk to each of you independently, and then look at video independently, and make kind of make a call and make a recommendation
Sure.
to the race director. Hey, race director, I think that, you know, maybe there's a couple position penalty, or there should be a probation here, or at least a reprimand, or maybe I don't I don't really see anything here. Sometimes stuff does happen. I know that the term racing incident is not one that a lot of people like to hear, particularly if they've been involved in it.
Right.
Um, but but the reality is that sometimes there are those things.
Sure.
A chain reaction happens, and um, you're just kind of sometimes you're caught up in it. But this is really here um, to help us address some things that maybe weren't being addressed before.
Right.
And if it needs to be escalated to the stewards of the meeting, that's where it can go. And um, if it's difficult to kind of adjudicate it quickly after a session between the class ambassador and the race director, maybe the race director says, "Look, we don't really have time to go through all the video and hunt down all the video." Um, Lately, what we've been doing in both Spec Miata and SMX is the race director has said, "Okay, we know that something happened. We need somebody to take a greater look at it." The race director is going to make a request for action, and that's almost the same as a protest.
Right.
The difference between that and a protest is from one driver against another driver.
Right.
This one is just the race director saying, "Look, something happened here. We don't have the ability to dive really deeply into it. We need the court to take a look at it, and to spend some time, bringing extra video in, and extra witness statements and things like that." So that's helped the process along as well. There's been a lot of activity. I will say that we brought Greg in. His first event was at Atlanta, which
Is he coming back after that event? Did he?
he said he was committing to the first two races, and I think that maybe after Atlanta, he was second guessing whether he should have been so bold as to do that. But Greg did a fantastic job, and for anybody that knows him, he's a very experienced racer. He's a very balanced scorecard when he looks at things like this.
Right.
But I also think he totally gets what we're trying to do here. We're trying to work with people and address things when they do happen, but also kind of encourage behavior and respect on the track, to where we don't find ourselves in these situations where we need to come and talk about it.
So, how much is the ambassador position working on this whole thing before something goes bad, or has to be looked at a deeper level? How much of that role is talking with drivers before the race, between sessions, and coaching, but more highlighting? We see this. We don't want to see this. We don't want to have to make this a thing later on. So now that you know it could be a thing, don't do it.
So yeah, I mean, so this is a work in process, and this is an evolution. We've
Sure.
had the ambassador at 3 events now. The way that I started the NOLA weekend, the way that I think Greg started the Atlanta weekend with some notes that I had, and I know the way that he's going to start this weekend is with a letter to all the participants, hoping that they open their email coming from Motorsport Reg and read it. That recaps some of the things that we've seen. Okay, here's what kind of things have popped up, what's gone wrong, what can we learn from it, and one of the big things, and it's really interesting, and it's something that we've noticed the last couple of years, and it's not just young drivers, it's anybody that comes into our sport at this level who has watched a lot of racing and is a fan and sees how quickly a IMSA or an IndyCar or a NASCAR can essentially call a penalty during a race. And the reality is, and then they don't understand why when something happens in SCCA, we ask people to protest. And it really comes down to this. We don't have cameras everywhere.
Right.
The cameras that we do have at Super Tour are static.
Right.
We don't have a team of 15 people in race control. And I don't know that that's what any of those other organizations have, but there are people that specifically sit there and watch the screens.
Right.
And look for things, and then have video replay that they can go back and roll back things and look at it immediately and call a quick penalty in the middle of a race. This is club racing, right?
Right.
Well, we do have some video assets. We don't have the staffing, and we don't have the level of video assets and replay, and all the in-cars that are live streaming
right.
up, to a helicopter or however they work now. Back when I was working with in-cars with the World Challenge Series, it was shot up to a helicopter and back down to the truck. But those are some of the challenges that we deal with, and it's hard, and it's interesting when we explain that to people, and kind of the aha moment. It's like, oh, you're right. Even though I don't want to go and protest my buddy, my fellow racer, because if I protest him now he's going to think that I'm out to get him, and we can't, hang out and have a conversation in the paddock. But the reality is, even when you play stick and ball sports and you're out there, you can be friends with your competitors, but if somebody's violated a rule, you kind of have to we need to call fouls on each other sometimes. Right. And especially when we don't have the level of live officiating that they have at other levels, but that's what people are used to watching. Formula One, the stewards, the technology that they have in a Formula One race control. And I had a chance to experience some of that in Austin last year. It's, the 4 stewards that they have in that room, and the video assets and the access to all of the past races, not just at that venue, but just in general, and how they can call things up and look for precedents.
Right.
Have we ever seen this type of thing happen? And they can call that up and they can go and reference that. And it's unbelievable. And then everybody watches Formula One, and what was one of the biggest things that came out of the Australian Grand Prix? It was how could they penalize Alonso 20 seconds for that?
Right.
And once again, you can have access to everything, and it's still you're open to criticism with how you officiate things.
Well, and the other option, or the other part of the system that's different with the pro races, is that all of those races are 2 hours minimum. So you can take the time during the race and maybe look at all these different options and make a decision. You can't do that in a 25-minute or 35-minute race. And we really want to not be in the practice of getting it wrong during the race, because then it's not fixable. If you make a decision while the racing is happening and you're wrong, how do you fix that wrong for the driver that you were wrong for? You can't. There's no way to do it.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And that's the philosophy of of race directors and chief stewards and operating stewards is you can't take that back.
Right.
If you give a penalty, sometimes it's really hard as we know, as I just said, you don't have access to everything. You're going to have access to more things after the session.
Right.
You're going to have access to that driver's video, to potentially other drivers' video that were around them. But having access to that stuff, and now that we do have video cameras in every car, while it's a good thing, more information is good, helps you make a better decision. But you have to remember at these events where we have 200, 300, 400 cars that are racing each day, it's not the 20 car Formula One race,
right,
that has dozens of officials that are working on it. It's a couple dozen officials that are working on a 300-400 car event, and again, the rapid nature of things, the race director trying to review things and make calls, and they only have 25-30 minutes to do it before the next group comes in to impound.
That's what I tell people when they ask, how did you not get that driver right on the live stream? And I'm like, Lee Diffie has to memorize 22 race cars, or Crofty, or whoever it is, and it's 300 plus cars, and sometimes we see a car once or twice a year. It's not like we're seeing Denny Stain at every single race, and his car's bright orange, so it's the same thing though. You've got so much more volume of cars to deal with, so that makes perfect sense. So there's been some typical social media hysteria over all of this, especially after Atlanta, and a lot of it was these new kids in SMX-5. It's causing, but gosh darn it, we had full course yellows in dang near every race on Saturday and Sunday. So it's not just the kids. It's not just SMX-5. A lot of people were doing some nutty stuff. And, some of it was the weather on Saturday. That makes some sense. Sunday, though, was about as good as racing conditions as you're ever going to have, other than some wind on Sunday. What are your thoughts? I mean, obviously, green to checker has been something you've been championing for, what, now we're in a third year with it? What's going on this year? Because it seemed like last year green to checker was going pretty well, and it seems like early this year there's not quite as much green to checker going on.
I wish I had data that could back that up. I definitely, Sunday at Atlanta was not stellar. We were doing okay, and then we had some setbacks, and we got pushed against the schedule a little bit. We definitely have learned, and this obviously, as you mentioned, is not solely a Spec Miata or Spec MX-5 or Spec Racer or Spec anything issue. It's, we are having some challenges in different classes. Multi-class racing is a, something that I've always said we do out of necessity. We don't do it because we love to do it. Some people love multi-class racing. But again, I think that even if IMSA had 40 GTP cars, they would have a 40 car GTP race and probably find another way to race the GT cars. That's just my assumption there. Again, we're racing multi-class racing out of necessity. We have made some changes after Atlanta, where we had SMX with T2, T3, T4. That was a particularly challenging run grouping, particularly when you have 33 SMX cars and they're starting at the back of a split start, and then you have an immediate caution,
right?
And now they're back, and now they're together, and so there's give and take, and frankly, we need to all learn as racers in SCCA by watching those series that we watch, by watching IMSA, and there is give and take. Even among the professionals that know that every position is important, but the worst position you can possibly be is off track in a wall or in the gravel. Right. So there's give and take. Just because you're the faster car coming through doesn't entitle you to a piece of property, to a piece of the racetrack. These are shared resources that we all have to deal with.
Sure.
So I think that there were some perfect storm situations that happened at Atlanta. We had some really good racing there, but we had some situations where we got some cars that ended up off the track in bad spots. Um, so, you know, as I mentioned, there were some learnings out of Atlanta. We changed the run grouping um, for both VIR and for Mid Ohio, where we split SMX out from touring. We had split super touring and touring apart because some of the events had some really big car counts. Um, we've maybe not quite seen those car counts in all of those classes this year. And we asked the drivers. So for VIR and for Mid Ohio, we sent emails to everybody entered in those two run groups and said, "Hey, we're thinking of shuffling this deck a little bit. Does anybody really have any objection to doing this?" And I mean, almost unanimous response of supporting the changes, and it's not ideal for the touring or super touring guys, but the reality is, um, when you put 30 plus cars in one class in a run group with 30 other cars in three or four classes, it's going to create some challenges, and we've seen it with some other classes and some other run groups. But I think that the added nature of what some of the drivers in SMX have, feel is on the line. But as our friend you mentioned,
Yeah.
Josh Smith at Mazda said to me last week, the drivers that are selected that win the shootout aren't going to be selected because of the pass they made in the second race at Road Atlanta, or
Right.
pick a Hoosier Super Tour race. It's going to be about their season, their body of work, and crash cars are probably not going to help in that situation.
Yeah. As I always tell people, people remember crash cars much more than they remember the fact that you only finished sixth.
Yeah.
you know, but that's always part of the process. One of the other things that we've run into, and I know early in the day, sometimes things happen, and there's always an effort to give as much track time as possible when you have, of course, yellows or a black flag or a red flag. And then we get to the end of the day and something happens, and sometimes those run groups pay the price for trying to be generous to the early day run groups.
Mhm.
Is that something that's being talked about in how the structure of the day is managed as the day goes along?
Yeah, I mean, it's always part of the discussion as things transpire during the day. The nice thing about the 3 day schedules is there is a little bit of opportunity, particularly on Friday and Saturday, um, to have something go wrong and be able to recover from it and
Right.
still get people the track time that we've advertised. One of the things we did when we changed the schedule last year, and I know this has been a big topic for people. We, in order to have another run group, to have a better session experience, and frankly have more manageable days, uh, we had to eliminate the first session on Friday, basically, or the third session, the first session, whatever you want to call it. There were three sessions before the first race. One of them was really short, 15 minutes, which one thing goes wrong and that session's done. We spend almost as much time between sessions as we do during those sessions.
Right.
Um, but one of the goals of that was to have a schedule that we could actually provide the track time that people expected. We were running into too many events with all of those sessions where we were having to cut things off or cut things short, or and to your point, you come in with an expectation this is the track time you're going to get. Now, obviously, if things just keep going wrong for your session, it's probably not, we can't just keep stopping the clock, right? We've got to keep things going because ultimately somebody is in the last group.
Yeah.
And it's not fair for the last group to pay the price of things that happened earlier in the day. The nice thing about Atlanta was, even though we got pushed at the end of the day Sunday, and Sunday was actually time-wise was going pretty well. And then we had a massive oil down.
Right.
And that was a big delay. So we went from feeling like we were in pretty good shape to, oh my gosh, how are we going to get this day in? And we were pushing up against the end of the day. And we did have to cut 5 minutes out of the maximum time allowed for the last two races. And they did a good enough job to get their full races in. So, good on them. It doesn't always work out that way, but yeah, I mean, it's a tough balance, and those are some of the things that ultimately both the series and the CRB and the board, have to look at for, how do we manage the growth and the opportunities within the road racing program into the future.
I don't want to belabor this point because we could be here for 2 hours, but looking at the feedback that we get from the drivers for these races, I have decided that it is absolutely impossible to make everybody happy all of the time. And it is an unenviable task that you have to balance all of the different entities, all of the different drivers, all of the different classes who all are looking for similar but different things. And I am very happy that my title is not VP of Road Racing for SCCA. So,
well, I appreciate that. And, somebody once told me that, real decisions are the ones that are hard to make.
Right.
And sometimes, as you mentioned, sometimes we'll ask a question and it's, if there are two options, it's kind of 50-50. And if there are three options, it's a third.
Right.
And you have to consider, survey data is just one, it is just that, it's data. It's a point to consider. And the hard decisions, sometimes you just need to make the decision that you feel is right. And then you need to work toward making it the right decision for everybody else. Right. And that may require fine tuning. And I feel like that's what we're doing all the time is we're asking questions, we're evaluating, we're fine tuning. We certainly don't always get everything right. But I like to think that based on, the experience scores that we get at the end of the events, the surveys are trending better, over the last several years. So if that's an indication, if we're making some more good decisions than bad, then maybe that's the case. But that's always our goal.
So let's move on. I think we've taken our big swing at that so far. A couple of other things we wanted to chat about before we get this thing wrapped up for this weekend, for this show anyway. We'll get to the easier one last. We'll get through one more of the tougher ones. Going to VIR. Going to VIR this weekend, and there's been a new system put in place for flagging and communications by the track at VIR. And it involves having a VIR staff flagger at every corner station, and that person reports to VIR and is supposed to work with the SCCA flaggers. Now, traditionally, as we all know, SCCA provided the flaggers for all of their races for all of the stations, and so this is a new dynamic that we're trying to deal with here. Of course, SCCA flaggers, many of them are aghast by this encroachment on the way we do things, because we've always done it that way, and for some for good reason too. I'm sure there's worry and anxiety. I was a flagger and a flag chief, so I completely get it. What have the discussions been between national and VIR? I don't want you to speak for the region down there, but I know that you guys have been talking with the region as well. Tell us how we got to here and where here is right now.
So, first of all, part of this is not new. Their racetracks typically have a department, or they have independent contractors or hourly employees that come in and flag at their track. They flag during the week when they have weekday events, like Track Night in America.
Right.
Utilizes the track resources there. Most of the other organizations utilize. They don't have what SCCA has,
right.
Which is good for us, but this has become a challenging thing to navigate, and really what brought it on, and this is just Eric speaking from a national organization standpoint. This is ultimately, the national organization does have a relationship with VIR that is largely because of the runoffs having been there.
Right.
But not there's only one runoffs every year, and there's only one place that hosts it. So not every region either has the benefit of or the curse of the national office having that relationship
right.
with a racetrack. So yeah, we have had some conversations. This is ultimately, our goal is to try and make sure that SCCA racing can continue at a place like VIR. That's the topic right now. So it's important to be working with North Carolina region, and really we took the approach of, well, where can we best help North Carolina region with this
right.
situation? And this is something that VIR brought about new for 2024, basically. And when you talk to VIR and you hear the rationale behind it, I understand ultimately, why they want to put this in place. And this is simply, they have a department at their business that those employees are flaggers. And when SCCA comes into the facility and rents the facility, in the past, those employees haven't had a work opportunity.
Right.
So as an employer, I can understand that rationale. Now, what we need to do, and what we have been talking about now for a little over a year, is okay. And obviously the first question was, no, we're still going to do things the way we've done them and the way we expect to do them. And when it was clear that wasn't really the option, and that the track wants to go in this direction, and again, from a business standpoint, I understand that. We needed to figure out a way to come up with the best compromise and way to approach this as possible. Right. It's been a challenge. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's been bumpy. I don't think it's where we want it to be. I'm not sure it's where VIR wants it to be. I can't speak for them, so can just speak from our standpoint. We want our workers and our flaggers and the people that participate in the club that way to have the opportunities that they can have to come out to our events. Right. And to have a great time and to be an integral part of those event operations. Some of the policies that were kind of put in place, and even just this week we had some further discussions, and I think that there was some initially some thought or some expectation that all the corner captains were going to be VIR staff, and we've worked past that. So the SCCA flag chief will work with the VIR folks and figure out who the corner captains should be. And then some of them may be SCCA volunteers, and some of them may be staff.
Right.
This is something that's not going to go away. It's something that we have to find ways to, work together to make sure that our events can still happen the way that we expect them to.
Right.
We're one of the only organizations that has the ability. And in fact, I would say we may be the only organization that has the ability, the processes, the structure, the training, and the skilled individuals that could show up to a racetrack where they left the gate unlocked and nobody was there, and we could go in and operate an event.
Sure.
But if we're the only organization that can do that, we're in a unique
Sure.
unique club of one.
Right.
And perhaps there's somebody else out there that I'm not thinking of, but I don't think so. So when racetracks look at us, we are unique in that standpoint. And so it's, it does take working together. It does take a little bit of give and take. And the things that are kind of deal breakers for SCCA, this was kind of the first time we've gone through this. And we needed to really work with them to get through it. I don't think we're through it yet.
Sure.
I think, ultimately we'll have a good weekend. I know that some people stayed away because of the policies that were put in place. Like I said, I think that we've made a little progress. It could be too late for some people to make it this week. But it's I'm not going to say that it's been one of the most fun things that we've been working through.
Right.
But it is challenging, and ultimately, our job is to make sure that our events run safely the way that our members expect them to, and that we have opportunities for our members to participate in motorsports the way that they want to.
Right.
VIR is a great place, and they are a good team to work with too. Right. It's just, this has become something that we've had to work through, and it's not been easy.
Yeah. I've got a couple of thoughts just want to share. The first one I don't expect you to respond to, but I know a lot of folks see this as a money grab, as VIR wanting to add a revenue stream to what is already a very expensive racetrack. All racetracks are expensive to rent, so it's not VIR doesn't have the corner on that market. But renting a racetrack is extraordinarily expensive for the weekend. And some people, and my first thought was, honestly, well, this is another way for them to add some revenue. I think you've kind of laid out how you feel it might be a little different than that. So don't need to respond to that. I will say, though, and I'm hoping that maybe the higher-ups at VIR will watch this when they find out we've talked about it. I think it would go a long way. We have a really cool new program here in the SCCA, our online training program. Mm-hmm. And I say this because once VIR gets us to do this, it won't be very hard to believe that other racetracks are going to try to implement this type of thing. So what the progress that you make working this out, I think will end up being a template, unfortunately, for some other racetracks. And other parts of the country don't have the luxury that North Carolina region has, where they have a huge cadre of flaggers who show up at their races. And great on them. They have a great staff of flaggers, and a lot of them. There are other parts of the country that don't have that many flaggers, and this might actually be something that would be helpful to some people. But I think how it's worked out is very important, how you guys figure out a way, the region, national, VIR, to make this relation symbiotic. But my thought was, I think it would make everybody involved a lot more comfortable with the situation is if the VIR would agree to send their flaggers or ask their flaggers to do our online flagging training. I think that might be a stepping off point, right?
So we've talked to VIR about it. They're actually really supportive of what we have put together from a flagging training perspective. So much so that they actually invited some of the VIR leadership is leadership of a group of racetrack owners and management that put on pro events. And they invited me to come and talk about exactly that.
Right.
And, acknowledging that there are going to be people that flag as their job.
Right.
And getting them some consistent training with the way that SCCA does things, which is still considered the gold standard, with how to do flagging and communications, and to get more people at least singing from the same songbook,
Right.
On the basics,
or at least on the same page on the songbook.
Yeah,
because not all of us can sing. You're in a rock band, so you're not the best example here. But no, all kidding
reading
aside,
from the same book. Let's just say reading from the same book.
Yeah, I just think it would be a good stepping off point, and also show good faith by VIR that it's a partnership as opposed to just an edict that's come down. So that's just my thought, and I would not be surprised to see other tracks try to do this if VIR is successful in pushing this through. So I think we're at the precipice of that, and as well as anybody how hard it is for regions to attract volunteer workers these days. So it's tough.
Well, and there could also be an opportunity here, and again, getting people trained in a similar fashion. In order to take SCCA training, you become a member,
right?
If you're a member of the same club, whether and this is a different situation, obviously, but you walk through a paddock and there are people that are working on cars that are there because they love it, and their buddy invited them to come for the weekend and work on a car, and they're staying in a tent or they've paid their own way to get there. And then in the paddock spot next to them, there could be somebody that's being paid to be there. Mm-hmm. And it's not exactly the same because, there've always been professional mechanics in paddocks, or paid mechanics. Let's put it that way, paid mechanics. But it's a little bit similar. But it's new and it's different for us. And it's not just happening for the first time here at VIR.
Right.
There are events that have to utilize, because of worker shortages, volunteer shortages, have to go to tracks to supplement what they need. So we've got a number of years of experience of trying to figure out how to work side by side with those folks. And when I say those folks, these are people that have, it's an opportunity for them. One, it's a job for them. But two, it may be a great job that allows them to be at a racetrack, which they think is cool. So, let's not just assume that these people are out there and they don't want to be there. It's still motorsports.
Yeah.
We all love motorsports. We all love having fun with cars. For some people, it's just how they got to that weekend is a little bit different.
Right. It used to be when there were paid flaggers, they were all SCCA flaggers getting paid because that was the only flaggers that were out there. Now it's changed a little bit. So, I'm glad everybody's trying to make it work out the best that it could be. And we always seem to make it work in the end. So I have faith. At least I have faith. All right, last topic. There's a new guy on the team. I haven't had a chance to meet him yet. Tried to get him on the podcast last week, and you're like, no. I'm not going to subject him to you just yet. Jeff Barrow is I don't want to say the new Deanna Flanagan because those are huge shoes to fill. but he's going to fill the role that Deanna has filled for I don't know how long. It feels like it's been like 80 years, but and he's training right now. Tell us a little bit about Jeff, and he's on board, and what's the plan?
Yeah, so Jeff has been around the industry for quite a long time. I've known him for over 20 years. When he was with various companies that were either suppliers or manufacturers involved in the business. We did some partnership deals through the years. We've had maybe some challenging conversations when he was on the OE manufacturer side and wondering why SCCA did things certain ways and why couldn't we do it the way that his manufacturer wanted it. But that's all part of being in the industry, and what that gives him is a really broad and educated background. He's also been a club member for over 30 years, longtime racer, racing Hondas and spec racers, and so he doesn't come into this completely new. He's been on for a couple of weeks now. Yes, the title is the title that Deanna's held and done such a great job for us for almost 10 years. And, she's been in the department for, another 6 or 8 years beyond that. Jeff will be a different director of road racing than Deanna was, or has been. And she's still involved, obviously, but, because he brings some different things. He brings some experience that I don't have, that Deanna doesn't have, that Mike Cobb doesn't have, that nobody on our staff has. And that's the sign of bringing a great new member to the team. And can he do the things that we need him to do, immediately with Deanna's move to a different department? Yes. He's got a very broad set of skills business wise and business management and event management and things like that. So those are important things that we need to definitely make sure we're covering, but he brings some new things as well. So we're excited to have him on board. He's going to split time between our office here in Topeka and his home office in North Carolina for the next short-term foreseeable future. We will get him out. He'll be at Hallett. That'll be his first official appearance at an event.
Nice.
He was kind of itching to go to VIR. Neither Deanna nor I will be there, and we figured, let's introduce him to everything as a team. But he'll be at a number of events on the rest of the Hoosier Super Tour calendar. And then obviously as we get into the planning phases for the runoffs, you mentioned he's in training, or he's just I think he referenced he's drinking from a fire hose right now. I'm sure he will be interested in coming on Inside the SCCA at some point in the future, but we probably need to give him a little bit of time to come up to speed before you start grilling him with the tough questions.
Oh, we don't ask tough questions. Cool. Anything else you want to touch on before we call it a show?
No, I mean it's hard to believe we're already halfway through the Hoosier Super Tour season, and we've got some great events coming up, but should see a runoff schedule coming out pretty soon, as well as the supplemental regulations. We're looking forward to the national championships at the end of this year, the 60th anniversary of the runoffs. Got some cool things in the works that we can reveal here in the next couple of months. But no, it's been a great start to the season. Participation has been pretty good across the board for us. We've mentioned some of the challenges that we continue to work through, but that's what happens when you have a lot of participants and really good competition, and that's what we're happy to see this year.
That's awesome. All right, before we let you go, well, actually, we are going to let you go. Don't go away, though, because I have something to ask you when we're done.
Yes, sir.
Because I'm already going to get you locked in for another show. I'm warning you ahead of time. Just want to make sure everybody takes a look at, I guess it's over this shoulder. Our partners on the show are, of course, Racekeeper and Ray Esports and Solo Performance. check all of their information out at the bottom of the show notes. There's links on podcasts and links to how to get to their websites. Those folks support us so that we can keep doing this every Wednesday night. So thank you to all of them. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Inside. Where's the button? There it is. That's going to do it for this episode of Inside the SCCA. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to the RacingWire Podcast Network so you won't miss any episodes. It would also be great if you leave a comment, especially if it's a good one. You can follow us on social media to find out who our next guest is and leave a question. Actually, I can... nope, I'm not going to tease it, although I know who next week's schedule is. And you can follow us on social media to find out who that's going to be. On Twitter, it's at RacingWireNet. There is a new Inside the SCCA every week. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend and go play with cars.
I'm Abby Shear, and when I'm on my way to an autocross, I listen to the Inside the SCCA podcast.
Inside the SCCA is a presentation of the RacingWire Podcast Network and Rural 15 Productions. This podcast is not affiliated with, endorsed, or sponsored by the Sports Car Club of America. The views expressed within are those of the host and our guests, and not that of the SCCA.